My name is Richard, 57 years old, founder of a $990 million technology company that changed the industry. Yet there I stood, outside my parents' living room, cast out by the very people who raised me. My own sister declaring me irrelevant, my father avoiding my eyes, a stranger's hand on my shoulder escorting me away from my family legacy. The betrayal cut deeper than any business loss I'd ever faced. They had no idea who they were really pushing away. No idea what I truly owned. If you're watching this video, let me know what you think about family loyalty. Hit like and subscribe to follow my journey of reclaiming my dignity. I grew up in a modest neighborhood in St. Paul, Minnesota, in a family that embodied middle-class American values. My father worked at the local manufacturing plant, coming home with calloused hands and tired eyes, while my mother taught third grade at the elementary school 3 blocks from our house. We never had much, but my parents made sure there was always food on the table and shoes on our feet. From an early age, I learned the value of hard work. By 14, I was mowing lawns in summer and shoveling driveways in winter. My parents insisted I save half of everything I earned for college. "Education is your ticket, Richard," my father would say, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had missed his own opportunities. My relationship with my sister Sarah was complicated from the start. 7 years younger than me, she came into our family when I was already forming my identity. She was the miracle baby after years of my parents thinking they couldn't have another child. Naturally, she received much of their attention and affection. While I understood this logically emotionally, it created a distance that would only grow with time. I still remember her as a toddler, following me around the house, wanting to be included in whatever I was doing. I would let her join my Lego building sessions, or watch as I took apart old radios. As she grew older, however, the gap between us seemed to widen instead of narrow. By the time I left for college, Sarah had become the center of the family universe, and I was the distant planet orbiting on my own trajectory. College was a revelation for me. I majored in computer engineering when the field was still finding its footing. The early 1990s were an exciting time in technology, with personal computers becoming mainstream and the internet beginning to change everything. I thrived in that environment of innovation and possibility. During my junior year, I met Jessica at a campus coffee shop. She was studying business administration with dreams of climbing the corporate ladder. We connected over late-night study sessions and shared ambition. By the time we graduated, we were married and expecting our son Marcus. Life was moving quickly, perhaps too quickly. I took a job at a software company while developing my own ideas on the side. Every evening after my day job and after putting Marcus to bed, I would head to our garage where I had set up a makeshift office with a salvaged desk and my personal computer. Jessica would bring me coffee at midnight, but her supportive smiles gradually gave way to concerned frowns as months passed with little to show for my efforts. "We have a baby, Richard," she would remind me. "We need stability, not pipe dreams." But I had glimpsed something others hadn't yet seen: software that could revolutionize how businesses manage their supply chains. I knew if I could just build a working prototype, the potential was enormous. The sacrifice was immense. I missed first steps, first words, weekends, and holidays. I emptied our savings account to buy server equipment. Jessica and I fought more frequently, her patience wearing thin with what she called my obsession. I understood her concerns, but I couldn't let go of the vision. Then came the night that changed everything. Jessica had packed her bags and taken Marcus to her parents' house. "When you decide to rejoin the real world, let us know," she said before closing the door. I sat alone in our empty house surrounded by printouts of code and business plans. It would have been easy to give up then, to chase after them and promise to be the husband and father they needed. Instead, I channeled that pain into 18 straight hours of coding. By morning, I had solved the critical algorithm problem that had been holding everything back. 3 months later, Jessica filed for divorce. I didn't contest anything. She got the house primary custody of Marcus and monthly support that stretched my remaining finances to the breaking point. But I kept my company, the one thing she didn't believe had any value. Despite living in a studio apartment and eating ramen noodles most nights, I made sure Marcus never felt the pinch. Every other weekend when he stayed with me, I would take him to the science museum or the park. He was too young to understand why his parents weren't together anymore, but old enough to sense that something was missing. The first real breakthrough came when a mid-sized manufacturing company agreed to pilot my software. Their efficiency improved by 26% in the first month. They signed a 5-year contract, and suddenly my garage project was a legitimate business with actual revenue. I hired my first 2 employees and moved operations to a small office space. I called Jessica that night, excited to share the news. "That's great, Richard," she said, her voice flat. "Does this mean you'll be increasing your child support?" That was the moment I realized some bridges couldn't be rebuilt. But it also cemented my determination to succeed, if not for her, then for Marcus and for myself. The next decade was a blur of growth and challenges. My company, initially called Logitech Solutions before we rebranded to Nexus Systems, expanded from those first 2 employees to over 50 within 5 years. We moved offices 3 times to accommodate the growth, eventually settling into a converted warehouse space that balanced professional appearance with startup culture. As success came, I made a deliberate decision to keep my financial situation private from my family. My parents had always been proud of my educational achievements, but they never quite understood my entrepreneurial drive. In their world, success meant a stable job with benefits and a pension, not the roller coaster of building a company from scratch. Sarah had finished college by then, with our parents attending her graduation ceremony with tears of pride. I had been unable to attend due to a crucial client meeting, something my father noted with a disapproving tone during our monthly phone call. "Family should come first, Richard," he said, unaware that this particular meeting had secured the future of 20 employees and their families. It was around this time that I met Amanda at a technology conference in Chicago. Unlike Jessica, who had viewed my business as a competitor for my attention, Amanda was fascinated by what I had built. She asked insightful questions about scaling challenges and market strategies. As we continued our conversation over dinner, I found myself sharing more about my vision than I had with anyone in years. "You know what's impressive," she said, swirling her wine glass thoughtfully. "Not just what you've built, but how you've managed to keep such a clear perspective on why you're building it." Amanda became my sounding board, my confidant, and eventually my wife. She had her own consulting business that allowed her flexibility to travel with me when necessary. Unlike my first marriage, we moved forward as true partners, each respecting the other's professional ambitions. Meanwhile, Nexus Systems continued its upward trajectory. We expanded into international markets, opening offices in Toronto and London. Our client list grew to include Fortune 500 companies and industry publications, began featuring our case studies. I was invited to speak at conferences, and occasionally my name would appear in business sections of major newspapers. Through it all, I maintained a modest public profile. We reinvested most profits back into the company, focusing on research and development. My personal lifestyle remained relatively simple. Amanda and I bought a comfortable but not ostentatious house. I drove the same car for 8 years. To outsiders, I might have appeared successful, but few would have guessed the true scale of what we had built. My parents entered their 70s and health issues began to emerge. My father developed heart problems, requiring expensive medication. My mother's arthritis made it difficult for her to continue teaching. They had modest savings and Medicare, but I worried about their financial security. Without revealing my true financial situation, I established an anonymous trust that helped cover their medical expenses and home repairs. Through a lawyer who served as an intermediary, I presented it as a program through their church for longtime members. My parents gratefully accepted the assistance, never suspecting their own son was behind it. Sarah, meanwhile, had married Thomas Blackwood, an ambitious man who described himself as an entrepreneur, but seemed to launch a new venture every 18 months. Each time he spoke with great confidence about his imminent success. Each time the business would quietly disappear, replaced by an even more promising opportunity. Despite my reservations about Thomas, I made efforts to stay connected with my sister. We would meet for lunch when I was in town, and I always remembered her birthday and sent thoughtful Christmas gifts. She would update me on our parents and her life, though our conversations remained surface level. The childhood gap between us had never really closed. As my parents aged, Thomas began taking an increasingly active role in their affairs. It started innocuously enough with offers to drive them to medical appointments or help with household maintenance, but then came suggestions about organizing their estate and protecting their assets. During one of our infrequent family dinners, Thomas dominated the conversation with talk of a family investment opportunity that could secure everyone's future. My father nodded along, clearly impressed by Thomas's confident projections and industry jargon. Richard should get involved too, my mother suggested. He knows about business. Thomas's smile tightened slightly. Richard's type of business is different. This requires a more traditional approach to wealth building. What exactly is my type of business? I asked mildly. You know, tech stuff. All theoretical until someone bigger buys you out. He waved his hand dismissively. This is real estate and fixed assets. Tangible value. I noticed Sarah staring intently at her plate during this exchange, not coming to my defense, but not fully endorsing her husband either. There was a new tension in the room that hadn't been there before. As Thomas's business ventures continued to struggle, I observed subtle changes in my family's dynamics. My parents began asking more probing questions about my work and income. Sarah would mention friends who had done well in technology and wonder aloud if I had similar opportunities. These conversations felt less like genuine interest and more like assessment. Meanwhile, Nexus Systems celebrated its 20th anniversary with over 300 employees globally and a valuation approaching $500 million. We held a company party where Amanda surprised me with a photo album documenting our journey from garage startup to industry leader. Looking through those images, I felt immense pride in what we had built, tempered with a strange sadness that I couldn't share this achievement with my family. You could tell them you know, Amanda said later that night, as we sat on our back porch listening to the summer crickets. They're your family. I shook my head. I want them to value me for who I am, not what I own. Amanda squeezed my hand. I understand. Just remember, keeping secrets has its own cost. How prophetic those words would prove to be. The first clear sign that something was amiss came in the form of increasingly frequent family meetings, orchestrated by Thomas and Sarah. These gatherings, always scheduled when I was likely to be traveling for business, focused on topics like legacy planning and family asset protection. When I would inquire afterward, my mother would say vaguely that it was just boring financial stuff and change the subject. During one Sunday call with my father, he mentioned almost casually that they were considering putting their house in Sarah's name for tax purposes. Alarm bells rang in my mind. Dad, that's a significant decision, I said carefully. Have you talked to an independent financial advisor about this? Thomas has it all figured out. He replied with the implicit trust he had never quite extended to my business acumen. Says it'll save us thousands in the long run. I reached out to Sarah the next day, suggesting lunch. We met at a quiet cafe near her real estate office, where she worked part-time, while supporting Thomas's latest venture. I'm concerned about this house transfer, I said after our initial catching up. It could have serious implications if either mom or dad needs long-term care in the future. Sarah's expression hardened slightly. Thomas has considered all angles. He's protecting their interests. And who's protecting them from Thomas? The words slipped out before I could censor them. Her face flushed. That's unfair and honestly offensive, Richard. Just because you've chosen to remain distant from family matters doesn't give you the right to swoop in and question decisions we've carefully made together. Together, it sounds like Thomas is making decisions and everyone else is nodding along. She gathered her purse and stood. This is exactly why we don't include you more. You've always thought you knew better than everyone else. Some things never change. As she walked away, I realized how effectively I had been sidelined in my own family. The narrative had somehow become that I was the distant, uninvolved son, despite the fact that I had been financially supporting my parents anonymously for years. The irony was painful. That evening, I called my lawyer and asked her to discreetly monitor any property transactions involving my parents' home. It felt invasive, but my instincts told me something wasn't right. 2 weeks later, she called with disturbing news. My parents had not transferred ownership of their house to Sarah as discussed, but instead had taken out a substantial home equity loan. The paperwork listed the purpose as business investment. "Can you find out where the money went?" I asked. 3 days later, I had my answer. The funds had been invested in Meridian Partners Thomas's newest venture, a real estate development company, that according to my research had no actual developments in progress. Further digging revealed that Thomas had 2 previous companies declare bankruptcy, leaving investors with pennies on the dollar. I sat in my office late that night, staring at the documents my legal team had compiled, feeling a complex mix of anger and sadness. My parents had put their home, their largest asset and safety net, at risk for Thomas's scheme, and I suspected they had no idea of the true risk involved. Amanda found me there at midnight, still poring over the papers. "What are you going to do?" she asked softly. "I'm going to save their house without them knowing it was me," I replied. "And then I'm going to find out just how deep this goes." Through a series of carefully structured transactions, I created another anonymous entity that purchased the debt from the mortgage company. Then I significantly reduced the interest rate and extended the term, making the monthly payments manageable on my parents' fixed income. As far as they knew, the mortgage company had simply offered a modification to valued customers. Meanwhile, I hired a private investigator to look more deeply into Thomas's business practices and current financial situation. The report I received was worse than I had anticipated. Thomas was underwater on multiple investments, facing several lawsuits from previous business partners, and had recently been denied additional business loans from 3 different banks. This explained his sudden interest in family asset planning. He wasn't protecting my parents' assets, he was looking for a way to access them. The final piece fell into place during a holiday dinner at my parents' house. Thomas had had a few too many glasses of wine and began boasting about his latest deal. "The best part," he said, refilling his glass, "is leveraging other people's money. That is the true secret to wealth." My father nodded appreciatively, while my mother looked on with pride. Sarah caught my eye briefly, then looked away. "And whose money are you leveraging in this deal, Thomas?" I asked pleasantly. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Various investors who understand vision and opportunity, including my parents." A silence fell over the table. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. Thomas laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Your parents are wise enough to diversify their holdings, unlike some people who put all their eggs in one basket." He gestured vaguely in my direction. My mother jumped in, clearly trying to diffuse the tension. "Who wants dessert? I made your favorite apple pie, Richard." As the conversation shifted, I noticed Sarah slip away to the kitchen, and I followed a moment later, ostensibly to help with dessert. "He is using them, Sarah," I said quietly, "and I think you know it." She kept her back to me, slicing the pie with jerky motions. "You don't understand. He has had some setbacks, but this new opportunity is different. Every opportunity is different until it isn't. How much have they invested?" She turned, then tears in her eyes. "They believe in him, in us. Why can't you—" "Because I've seen the actual numbers, Sarah. This isn't about belief, it's about reality." Her expression changed, hardening. "You've been spying on us, on our finances." I realized my mistake too late. In trying to protect my parents, I had revealed my surveillance. Sarah would certainly tell Thomas, who would spin this as evidence of my interference and jealousy. Sure enough, over the next few weeks, my parents became increasingly distant. My mother's weekly calls became brief and formal. My father stopped asking for my opinion on anything. I had become the outsider, the threat to family unity, while Thomas, the actual threat to their financial security, was embraced more tightly than ever. Amanda suggested again that I simply tell them the truth about my company and offer direct financial help, but I still resisted. "If they only accept me because of my money, then I haven't really been accepted at all," I argued. "Sometimes people need to see evidence before they can acknowledge truth," she replied. "Your success might be the evidence they need to question Thomas." But before I could reconsider my position, events accelerated beyond my control. I was in Seattle finalizing a major acquisition that would expand our cybersecurity capabilities when I received a text message from my father. It was unusually formal. "Family meeting at the house Sunday at 3 p.m. to discuss important financial matters. Please make every effort to attend." Something in the phrasing felt off, as if someone else had dictated the message. Thomas, most likely. Still, I rearranged my schedule, delegated key aspects of the acquisition to my executive team, and flew home early. Whatever was happening, I wanted to be present. The drive to my parents' suburban home that Sunday was filled with tension. The fallen leaves of late October swirled in the street, creating eddies of red and gold. I had made this drive countless times over decades, but today felt different, heavier somehow. Amanda had offered to come with me, but I had declined. "This is something I need to handle myself," I told her, though now pulling into the familiar driveway I wished for her steadying presence. My sister's car was already there, as was a black Mercedes I didn't recognize. Thomas had been driving a leased BMW the last time I saw him, but perhaps he had upgraded despite his financial troubles. It would be in character. I rang the doorbell instead of using my key, already feeling like a visitor rather than family. My mother opened the door, her smile tight and not reaching her eyes. "Richard, you came." She hugged me briefly, her body stiff. "Of course, Mom. Dad said it was important." She nodded, leading me to the living room without further comment. The familiar space had been rearranged to accommodate extra seating. My father sat in his recliner, looking older than his 76 years. Sarah and Thomas occupied the sofa, with Thomas dressed in what I recognized as his business meeting suit, complete with pocket square. Two strangers sat in chairs brought in from the dining room. One, an older man with silver hair and an expensive watch, had a leather portfolio on his lap. The other, younger and athletic-looking, sat slightly apart, his expression neutral but watchful. "You remember Walter Harris, our family attorney?" my father said, gesturing to the older man. I did not in fact remember him because, as far as I knew, my parents had never had a family attorney. This was Thomas's doing, clearly. "And this is Jordan, Thomas's business associate," my father continued, indicating the younger man. Jordan nodded, but did not offer to shake hands. Something about his posture reminded me of security personnel I had encountered at high-level corporate events. He was not here as a business associate, I suspected, but in some other capacity. "What's this about?" I asked, choosing to stand rather than take the remaining chair, which would have placed me with my back to the door. Thomas cleared his throat and nodded to Walter, who opened his portfolio. "We're here to discuss the formation of the Lancaster Family Trust and the consolidation of family assets under a unified management structure." Lancaster was my parents' surname, not Thomas's. Yet he was clearly positioning himself at the center of this unified management. "This structure will optimize tax advantages while ensuring proper inheritance procedures." Walter continued his tone, suggesting this was all routine and reasonable. I looked at my parents. My father stared at his hands while my mother busied herself straightening a doily on the arm of her chair. "And who would manage this trust?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Thomas has the necessary expertise," my father said, still not meeting my eyes. "He and Sarah would serve as primary trustees, with your mother and me as beneficiaries." "And what about me?" The question hung in the air. Sarah finally spoke, her voice carrying a rehearsed quality. "Richard is not involved anymore." The words struck like physical blows. Not involved. After all the anonymous support, all the times I had protected them without recognition, I was being written out. "This is a complex arrangement," I said carefully. "Has anyone consulted an independent financial advisor? Someone not connected to Thomas?" My father shifted uncomfortably. "Thomas has explained everything thoroughly." "I'm sure he has," I replied. "But given that this involves your home and retirement savings, wouldn't a second opinion be prudent?" Thomas interjected smoothly. "The opportunity window is limited, Richard. Delays could cost thousands in potential gains. Classic high-pressure tactics. Create urgency to prevent careful consideration." "What exactly is this opportunity that requires such haste?" I pressed. "A multi-property development in Phoenix," Thomas said confidently. "Pre-construction pricing with guaranteed returns of 15% annually." I had heard enough empty promises in my business career to recognize them instantly. There are no guaranteed returns in real estate, especially in pre-construction. That is a fact, not an opinion. Thomas's expression hardened. "This is exactly why we felt it best to proceed without your involvement. Your negativity and risk aversion have held you back professionally, and now you want to impose those limitations on your family." The irony of his statement might have been amusing under different circumstances. Instead, It filled me with cold anger. Mom, Dad, I said, turning to my parents, this arrangement places everything you've worked for under Thomas's control. Please take some time to consider independent advice before signing anything. My father finally looked up, his expression a mixture of resignation and discomfort. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Richard. Those words, coming from the man who had taught me to stand up for myself, cut deeply. He had already decided. They both had. Thomas nodded to Jordan, who stood and moved toward me. I think we should continue this discussion among the actual participants, Thomas said. Jordan will see you out. I stared in disbelief. They were having me escorted from my parents' home from a discussion about their financial future by a man who was essentially a hired bouncer. You're allowing this? I asked my parents directly. My mother looked away. My father said nothing. Their silence was answer enough. Jordan approached, not touching me, but positioning himself to make his purpose clear. Sir, if you would please. I felt a moment of pure clarity then. These people, my family, had made their choice, and it wasn't me. They had declared me unnecessary to their future, despite everything I had done to secure it. I straightened to my full height and looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes in turn. You declared me unnecessary, I said simply. Remember this moment. I turned and walked out on my own, Jordan following a respectful distance behind. As I reached my car, I heard the front door close with quiet finality. Something had ended here today, but something else, something I couldn't yet name, had begun. The drive home passed in a blur. My mind replayed the scene in my parents' living room over and over, each iteration stoking a fire that had been building for years. By the time I reached our driveway, my hands were shaking, not from fear or sadness, but from a cold, clarifying anger. Amanda was waiting in the kitchen, her expression changing from welcome to concern as she saw my face. What happened? She asked immediately, setting aside the book she had been reading. I recounted the meeting in detail, my voice steady but tight. When I finished, Amanda's normally compassionate face had hardened into something I rarely saw: righteous indignation on my behalf. They had you escorted out by a hired guard. Her disbelief mirrored my own. After everything you've done for them, everything they don't know I've done, I corrected her. That's the problem. I've been the anonymous benefactor for so long that they see me as the unsuccessful one, the cautionary tale against entrepreneurship. Amanda poured us both a glass of scotch and sat beside me at the kitchen island. So, what now? Do you finally tell them the truth? I took a long sip, letting the burn focus my thoughts. More than that, it is time they understand exactly who they've dismissed. My phone rang, displaying Marcus's number. At 32, my son had become a key executive in our company, heading the international division with the same drive and integrity that had made me proud since his college days. Unlike the rest of my family, Marcus knew everything about the company and my financial situation. Dad, are you okay? Mom just called me. Jessica and I had eventually found a peaceful co-parent relationship, and she had married a good man who treated Marcus well. She remained one of the few people who knew about my success, having signed a non-disclosure agreement during our divorce settlement renegotiation years ago. I'm fine, Marcus. Just family drama. She said Grandpa and Grandma had you thrown out of their house. That doesn't sound like them. It wasn't their decision, not really. It was Thomas orchestrating everything. Marcus had met Thomas only a few times and had formed an immediate, accurate assessment. That snake, what's he after? Their house, their savings, anything he can get his hands on to prop up his failing business ventures. What are you going to do about it? It was the same question Amanda had asked, but coming from my son, it carried different weight. Marcus had watched me build Nexus from nothing, had seen the principles and ethics that guided every decision. What would he think of what I was contemplating? I'm going to protect our family, I said finally. The real one. After we hung up, I turned to Amanda. I need to make some calls. What followed was a long night of strategic planning. I contacted my legal team, my financial advisors, and key executives at Nexus. By 3 a.m., we had outlined a comprehensive response to the situation. First, I needed to understand exactly how entangled my parents had become in Thomas's schemes. My security team uncovered what I had feared. Beyond the home equity loan, Thomas had been using my parents' good credit and stellar reputation in the community to secure business loans and investment commitments. Their names appeared on corporate documents for at least 3 of his entities, potentially exposing them to significant liability. By 6 a.m., with Amanda finally asleep upstairs, I sat alone in my home office watching the sunrise and contemplating the magnitude of what I was about to do. It would likely end any chance of reconciliation with my sister and possibly my parents, but allowing Thomas to continue would mean their financial ruin whether they recognize that danger or not. As the first light broke across the horizon, I made my decision. Family wasn't just about blood, it was about protection, even when those you protected didn't understand the threats they faced. At 7:30 a.m., I began executing our plan. First, I contacted the banks holding my parents' mortgage and other loans, revealing my ownership of Nexus Systems and using my financial position to negotiate immediate payoffs at discounted rates. By 8:15 a.m., my parents' home was fully paid off and secured against any future claims from Thomas's creditors. Next, I instructed our legal team to send formal cease and desist letters to all entities where Thomas had used my parents' names without proper disclosure of risks. The letters made it clear that any agreements had been secured under potentially fraudulent pretenses. At 9 a.m., I called an emergency board meeting of Nexus Systems where we voted unanimously to go public with a press release about our upcoming expansion and my role as founder and CEO. After 27 years of relative anonymity, I was stepping into the public eye. The final step came at 10 a.m. I personally sent emails to Thomas, Sarah, and my parents, revealing the full extent of my business success and net worth. Attached were documents showing all the ways I had anonymously supported them over the years: the mortgage assistance, the medical bills, even the college fund I had established for Sarah's children. The email concluded simply, "For decades, I have protected this family from the shadows. Now, in the light of day, I am taking direct control of that protection. All financial connections to Thomas Blackwood and his enterprises have been severed. The family home is now secure and fully paid for. I would welcome a conversation about our path forward should you wish to have one." By noon, the story had broken in the business press. Tech billionaire reveals identity Nexus Systems founder Richard Lancaster steps into spotlight. Our company's stock, previously traded under a corporate umbrella that obscured my ownership, surged on the news. The first response came from Sarah, a text message consisting of a single word: how I didn't reply. There would be time for explanations later, if explanations were what she truly wanted. Thomas called next, his voice oscillating between rage and ingratiating charm. "Richard, there's clearly been a misunderstanding. If you had just told us about your situation, we could have worked together. Family helping family." "Like you were helping our parents," I replied calmly. "That was different. I was protecting their interests." "No, Thomas. You were using them as collateral for your failures. That ends today. You have no right to interfere in our family matters." He sputtered, his fake charm evaporating. "You made it my business when you had me escorted from my parents' home. Consider today's actions my response." I hung up as he was still protesting, then blocked his number. The final call, the one that mattered most, came at nearly 6 p.m. My father, his voice sounding older and smaller than I had ever heard it. "Richard," he said, "I think we need to talk." The meeting was set for 10 a.m. the following day at my corporate office. I chose the location deliberately. If this confrontation was going to happen, it would be on my territory where I felt most confident and in control. Amanda insisted on being present. "They need to see us as a united front," she said, selecting a conservative navy suit that projected both authority and approachability. I opted for my usual work attire, a well-tailored gray suit, with a blue tie that Marcus had given me for my birthday. We arrived early, allowing time to prepare the conference room. I had instructed our legal team to compile folders with all the documentation of my anonymous support over the years, as well as evidence of Thomas's financial manipulations. Each folder sat at a designated seat, names printed clearly on the covers. Our receptionist called at precisely 10 a.m. "Mr. Lancaster, your family has arrived. Please show them in, Angela." Sarah and Thomas entered first. Sarah looked like she hadn't slept, her usual polished appearance slightly frayed at the edges. Thomas, by contrast, had dressed for battle in his most expensive suit, his smile fixed and cold. "Impressive offices, Richard." he said, glancing around with exaggerated appreciation. "You've been holding out on us." I didn't respond to the bait, instead gesturing to their seats at the conference table. Amanda greeted them with professional courtesy, but minimal warmth. My parents entered a moment later. My father moved slowly, leaning more heavily on his cane than I remembered. My mother looked small beside him, her eyes darting nervously around the unfamiliar corporate environment. I felt a pang of regret at putting them in this situation, but pushed it aside. This reckoning had been years in the making. "Thank you for coming," I began once they were seated. "I know yesterday's revelations came as a shock to all of you." "A shock," Thomas interrupted. "You deliberately concealed your success from your family while spying on our finances. I would call that more than a shock." "Thomas," my father said quietly, "let Richard speak." The rebuke, mild as it was, surprised me. Perhaps the events of the past 24 hours had already begun shifting the family dynamics. "For the past 20 years," I continued, "I have provided financial support to this family through anonymous channels: college funds for Sarah's children, medical bill coverage for mom and dad, mortgage assistance when needed." I gestured to the folders before them. "The documentation is all there, along with statements from the financial institutions involved." My mother opened her folder with trembling hands, scanning the first few pages. Her eyes widened as she recognized transactions and assistance that had been attributed to church programs or insurance adjustments. "You did all this," she whispered, "without telling us. I wanted to help without changing our relationship. I was afraid that if you knew about my financial situation, it would create a barrier between us." "So instead you created a barrier of secrets," Sarah said, her voice sharp but brittle. "You played God with our lives, deciding from afar what help we deserved." "Would you have preferred no help at all?" Amanda asked mildly. Sarah flushed but didn't answer. Thomas cleared his throat. "While this family drama is certainly fascinating, I fail to see the purpose of this meeting. Richard has made his point. He's wealthy and powerful. Congratulations. Now perhaps we can discuss how to move forward productively as a family." I fixed him with a level stare. "That's exactly why we're here, Thomas, to discuss moving forward. But first, we need to address what happened yesterday and the events leading up to it." I reached for a remote on the table and pressed a button. The large screen on the wall flickered to life, showing video footage of the previous day's meeting in my parents' living room. The angles indicated it had been recorded from multiple hidden cameras. "You recorded us?" Sarah exclaimed. "In Mom and Dad's house, is that even legal? Minnesota is a one-party consent state." My lawyer spoke up from her position near the door. As Mr. Lancaster's parents were aware of his arrival and expected his participation in the discussion, the recording falls within legal parameters. The room fell silent as the scene played out exactly as I had described it to Amanda Sarah, declaring I wasn't involved anymore. My father's resignation, Thomas orchestrating my removal from the family meeting. When it ended, my mother was openly weeping. My father stared at his hands, much as he had done during the actual meeting. Sarah looked ill while Thomas maintained his mask of professional detachment, though I noted a muscle twitching in his jaw. "I have spent decades building something significant," I said into the silence. "Not just a successful company, but a life of purpose and integrity. Yesterday, you declared me irrelevant to this family's future. Today, I'm making my own declaration." I turned to Thomas directly. "You will remove yourself from all financial involvement with my parents immediately. Any business ventures using their names or credit will be dismantled in an orderly fashion, with all liabilities assumed by you personally, not them." "You can't dictate terms to me," he blustered, but with less conviction than before. "Actually, he can," my lawyer interjected. "We've already filed preliminary injunctions based on evidence of financial manipulation. Mr. Lancaster is simply offering you an opportunity to resolve this without public legal proceedings." Thomas's facade cracked slightly, revealing the calculation behind his eyes. He was weighing his options, recognizing the changed power dynamic. I continued. "Sarah, you have a choice to make. Your husband has been systematically exploiting our parents' resources and trust. That is not an accusation. It is a documented fact." I gestured to the folders again. "You can continue supporting his schemes, or you can take steps to protect yourself and your children." Sarah looked at Thomas, then at our parents' conflict evident in her expression. "You make it sound so simple," she said finally. "It isn't simple, but it is necessary." My father spoke up, then his voice stronger than it had been the day before. "Richard, I owe you an apology. We all do." He looked around the table, including my mother and Sarah, in his statement. "We allowed ourselves to be misled, and in the process we hurt you deeply." "Dad, you don't have to apologize," Thomas began, but my father raised his hand. "Be quiet, Thomas. I'm not finished." The authority in his tone, so familiar from my childhood, momentarily silenced everyone. "We accepted your help for years without knowing it came from you. We pushed you away based on false assumptions. And yesterday we allowed you to be treated shamefully in our home. That is on us, not just on Thomas." My mother reached across the table, her hand extended toward me. "Can you forgive us, Richard?" The gesture, so simple and sincere, threatened to unravel the composed exterior I had maintained throughout the meeting. I looked at Amanda, who nodded almost imperceptibly, her eyes soft with understanding. I took my mother's hand. "There's nothing to forgive. You were misled by someone you trusted. That's on him, not you." Thomas stood abruptly. "This is absurd. You're painting me as some kind of villain when all I've done is try to help this family secure its future. If Richard had been honest about his resources years ago, none of this would have happened." "Sit down, Thomas," Sarah said quietly, surprising everyone. "Just stop talking." He stared at his wife in disbelief, then gathered his folder and jacket. "I won't be subjected to this character assassination. Sarah, we're leaving." Sarah didn't move. "No, Thomas, I'm staying. I need to understand what's happened here. Really happened. You can go if you want." The moment hung in the air between them, a power shift as palpable as electricity. Thomas looked around the room, realizing he had lost his audience, his influence, and possibly his wife in the span of 30 minutes. "Fine," he said tightly. "We'll discuss this at home." He strode out the door, closing firmly behind him. In the silence that followed, something subtle changed in the room's atmosphere. The confrontation had ended, leaving space for something new to begin. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, nor was it reconciliation, but it was a start. "So," my father said finally, $990 million. Despite everything, I found myself smiling. "Give or take a few million depending on the market today." "And all this time we thought you were struggling to make ends meet," my mother added, shaking her head in wonder. "That was partly my fault," I acknowledged. I wanted to succeed or fail on my own terms without family pressure or expectations. By the time I had clearly succeeded, the habit of privacy was deeply ingrained. Sarah looked up from her folder, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "The trust funds for my kids. The anonymous donor was you all along." I nodded. "They're your children, Sarah. Whatever issues existed between us, they shouldn't suffer for it." A single tear tracked down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. "I don't know how to process any of this yet." "You don't have to figure it all out today," Amanda said gently. "This is just the beginning of a conversation, not the end." As the meeting concluded and we prepared to leave, Marcus arrived, having flown in specifically to support me in this confrontation. The sight of my son, confident and compassionate as he greeted his grandparents with genuine warmth, filled me with a quiet pride that transcended the pain of recent events. Whatever happened next, I knew I had done the right thing, not out of vengeance, but out of love for the family I had always protected, even when they didn't know they needed protection. 6 months after that pivotal confrontation in my office, much had changed in our family landscape. The transition wasn't smooth or without pain, but gradually we found our way toward a new equilibrium. Sarah and Thomas separated 3 weeks after our meeting. The process was complicated by his continued financial entanglements, but with my legal team's assistance, she managed to extricate herself from the worst of his schemes. They weren't yet divorced, but Sarah had moved into her own apartment and was focusing on rebuilding her life and relationship with our parents. To everyone's surprise, including mine, she approached me about working at Nexus Systems. "I have a business degree I've never really used," she reminded me, "and apparently business sense runs in the family." I created a position for her in our corporate social responsibility division, overseeing charitable initiatives and community partnerships. It played to her strengths in relationship building, while keeping her separate from the core financial operations until trust could be fully reestablished. She proved herself diligent and insightful, earning the respect of her colleagues on her own merit. My parents sold their suburban home not out of financial necessity, but from a desire for simpler living. They purchased a comfortable single-story townhouse, 15 minutes from Amanda and me, allowing for regular family dinners and impromptu visits. The transition to closer proximity initially felt awkward decades of distance, not erased by mere geography. But with time, our interactions became more natural and genuinely warm. Marcus took on increased responsibilities at Nexus, being groomed for eventual succession as CEO. His leadership style differed from mine, more collaborative and intuitive, but the core values remained the same: integrity, innovation, and responsibility. Watching him navigate complex business challenges with confidence gave me a satisfaction deeper than any financial success. As for me, the process of healing began slowly, almost imperceptibly. The first time my father called to ask my opinion about an investment, I felt a shift in our relationship. The evening my mother texted just to share a memory from my childhood showed me that bridges could indeed be rebuilt. When Sarah and I managed to laugh together over coffee, remembering some long-forgotten family vacation mishap, I recognized that forgiveness was not a single act, but a continuous choice. The journey wasn't always forward-moving. There were setbacks and difficult conversations, old wounds reopened before they could properly heal. But underlying it all was a commitment to honesty that had been missing for too many years. Amanda, as always, provided perspective when I struggled. Healing isn't linear, she reminded me during a particularly difficult week after a tense interaction with Sarah. It's messy and uncomfortable, and sometimes it feels like you're moving backward, but you're not. You're just processing parts you weren't ready to face before. The business continued to thrive, crossing the billion-dollar valuation mark that spring. I began planning a gradual transition to retirement, wanting to enjoy life with Amanda while we were still young and healthy enough for adventures. We purchased a vacation home on the coast of Maine, a place that had captivated us during a weekend getaway years earlier. Perhaps the most meaningful development was the establishment of the Lancaster Family Foundation, focused on supporting first-generation entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. The foundation provided not just funding, but mentorship and practical business education, breaking the cycle of financial ignorance, as Marcus described it in the mission statement he helped craft. Thomas eventually relocated to Florida, where he launched yet another business venture. I maintained monitoring of his activities to ensure he didn't attempt to re-engage with my parents or Sarah, but otherwise I let him fade from our family narrative. Some chapters are better closed than rewritten. Sitting on the deck of our main house one evening, watching the sunset paint the Atlantic in shades of gold and crimson, Amanda asked me if I had any regrets about how everything had unfolded. I regret the years of distance, I admitted, the moments missed that can never be reclaimed. But I don't regret the final confrontation or its aftermath. Sometimes healing can only begin after lancing the wound. She nodded, understanding as always. And has it been worth it? The reconciliation. I thought about my mother's birthday celebration the previous weekend, how she had hugged me with genuine affection. I remembered my father asking Marcus detailed questions about the business pride evident in his eyes. I recalled Sarah introducing me to a friend as my brother, the one who saved me when I couldn't save myself. Yes, I said simply. It has been worth it. I spent many years building walls to protect myself from potential rejection, only to discover that those same walls prevented authentic connection. The true measure of wealth isn't found in bank accounts or corporate valuations, but in the courage to remain open to those who once hurt you, to offer second chances when merited, and to stand firm in your values even when standing alone. It took me 57 years to learn that power isn't about controlling others, but about controlling your own responses to life's inevitable disappointments. Sometimes the strongest action isn't walking away, but walking back toward those who once pushed you aside, offering not resentment, but the opportunity for redemption. What would you do if your family cast you out only to discover you held the keys to their future? Would you choose revenge or reconciliation? Have you ever had to stand up to family for what was right, even when it hurt? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, family isn't always defined by blood, but by those who stand beside you when standing becomes difficult. Thank you for listening to my story. And until next time, hold your head high and your heart open.